Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Empire Sports Talk. I am your host, Roman Gennaro. This week we had the great pleasure of sitting down for an interview with Minnesota Twins prospect and current pitcher for the St. Paul Saints in AAA, Austin Schulfer, who told us a little bit about his baseball journey, lessons he picked up from Sonny Gray, and everything he's looking forward to from a possible call up in 2024. I don't want to waste any time talking about the interview. I want to get you right out there to it. Let's go. Hello, everybody. This is Roman Gennaro of Empire Sports Talk, and I'm here today with a very special guest, Minnesota Twins minor league prospect and right-handed pitcher Austin Schulfer has thankfully granted us an interview today. Thanks, Austin. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Happy to be on. It's been a long time in the process of getting me on to do a little talking on the podcast, but I'm glad I'm here.
Absolutely. No, you made you hit me up the other day. You said, "Man, I don't check my messages during the season," and I get it. So it was one of those things that as soon as the season ended, we got you. So we're just happy to have you.
Absolutely.
So just a little backstory for our listeners and our viewers. You and I met a while back when you were here in Jacksonville, where we filmed the podcast, and we met through some other friends, but we quickly realized we had a mutual friend in common. You remember this?
I do slightly remember this. I do remember it was with the church group over at 1122.
Correct.
Um and yeah, it's crazy to think about how long ago that was that we
But
met, but
through but through getting to know you and talking that you played baseball and all this stuff, found out that you were I believe at the time you were with the Cedar Rapids Colonels in the Twins organization, and we realized that one of your teammates was a good friend of mine from high school.
shoot, I don't remember that. I
It
do
was Hunter Lee. You remember Hunter Lee though,
Oh,
right?
Hunter. Yes, I do remember Hunter. Yes, I do
Yeah,
remember.
no,
I,
and you took a picture with me and sent it to him through Snapchat like immediately after we found that out.
yeah, I do remember that now. It's crazy to think how long ago that was,
It
even like
was, yeah, I was just thinking about that the other day. Yeah, exactly.
playing in Cedar Rapids and Hunter. I mean we didn't get to golf as much as I probably like to have golfed with Hunter. He kicked my butt the only time we went, but
He's a pretty good golfer, yeah.
great golfer, great dude. But yeah,
It's a
it's
weird thing about baseball players too. A lot of baseball players are really good golfers.
I would say a lot of baseball players like to golf, but we're not as good as we think we are. It's this
That's probably true too.
it's this weird thing where like, you're competitive in a sport and you think you should be good at it, but you're just not, and it's very frustrating. But yeah, Hunter is the exception though. Amazing golfer.
We can't all be Mookie Betts or Michael Harris II, where you're literally a pro at everything you touch. We can't all have that level of success.
That's really true. Those guys are fun to watch, and whatever they do, it's mind-boggling how you can be good at all of those sports.
Exactly. So let's get a little backstory on you. I got a couple questions for you. We'll let our viewers and our listeners get to know you a little bit more. So tell us about your baseball journey and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, so I grew up playing baseball my whole life in Wisconsin. Obviously, not the biggest baseball state. It's growing there, but it's not like Florida. It's not like Texas. It's really hard to continue to play baseball all year round. So grew up, really grinding, doing whatever I could to get better. And I was always good, but not fantastic. Good for Wisconsin, but not great for the country. And um, I kind of hit this spurt where all of a sudden I started to throw harder. It was, instead of throwing 80 at 15, it was 86, and then it was 88, and then it was 90, and then it's kind of that realization of like, oh, I could do something with this. And the coach that had coached me and helped me get to where I was at was really good friends with the coaches over at Wisconsin Milwaukee, where I decided to go to college. And in college, I had success really early, and baseball humbled me the next year. And
It does that.
just just like life does, baseball's shown me a lot of life lessons, and through that brought me closer to my faith in Christ and all those things. I'm sure we'll touch on that later, but
Absolutely.
um, struggled a little bit, and Unfortunately didn't get signed my junior year, my first eligible year, and really had to put up or shut up, and did really well my senior year and got a chance. And um, as I've grown through the Twins ranks, I've really had to earn everything I've had. So it's one of those things where um, it's very gratifying experience to be in AAA and be on the doorstep of the big leagues. And obviously, getting to the big leagues is the goal, but it's I've had to grind through the minor league process, and nothing's really been ever given. And I think that's really a shout out and a testament, like, to the Twins organization and the system to have believed in me so far and helped me get to where I'm at, like they have with a lot of the guys I've gotten drafted with, and teammates. They're really good at developing those guys, such as myself.
No, exactly, and we'll touch more on all that in a minute. But you mentioned something interesting too. I think our audience will know that I've talked about this before. You mentioned that baseball will humble you, and there's a very famous saying by Ted Williams, the greatest hitter that ever lived, and he said, baseball's the only profession where you can fail 7 out of 10 times and be considered great.
Exactly, and that's honestly, like, the older that I've gotten and the more that I've played baseball, the more people I've been around. It's crazy how similar life and sports or being successful in whatever you're gonna do is like I said, connected. One year you're good, then you can be a Cy Young winner one year, and next year you have a 60 ERA. You could hit 350.
Exactly.
Next year you hit 220. Like, it's
Exactly. That's why it's hard to have a lot of egos in the sport of
yes,
baseball, is because like
yes.
you've still failed. You could have an MVP type season and you've still failed 70% of the time.
Right, exactly. And
You know,
and we've all seen it where, one year a guy hits, 30 line drives right at guys, and another year they hit 30 loopers down the line, and all of a sudden they have 30 more doubles. It's one
exactly,
of those things
exactly.
where it's crazy.
And then another thing you touched on, which for in recent episodes, the audience will know that I've talked about this, is that you had to earn it at every single level of the Twins organization, which I've talked about on the podcast. Is like it doesn't matter when you get to college, in your case baseball, when you get to college baseball, it doesn't matter how good you were in high school. When you get to the lowest level of minor league baseball, it doesn't matter how good you were in college. If you make it to the pros, oh, and hopefully you do. We're all rooting for you here at Empire Sports Talk. If you make it to Minnesota, or I should say Minneapolis, because you're technically in Minnesota in
Just right
Triple A,
across
which
the
is
river,
funny.
yes.
But if you make it up there, you're starting at zero. They don't care. They don't care how good you were at Triple A. You have to earn it at every level. And I've talked about that recently with Caleb Williams and the demands he's making of the NFL. But you touched on that point very interestingly, that it does not matter where you are in your baseball journey. You've got to earn it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I've seen it personally, with my friends and people that I've played with going up there. It's a whole nother level. And speaking of myself a little bit too, like, I feel like every level I go to, I struggle a little and have to figure it out. And I think that's kind of like those growing pains that you see with a lot of rookies where, maybe, speaking like NFL and maybe pitching or baseball or anything really, if you're a rookie sensation, like, it's really special because it is hard to make
Exactly.
that transition. Every level is different, as much as it's people say, oh, it's similar, it's this and that. Like, every level you're playing against better competition, more
Exactly.
consistent players, So yeah, it's an amazing experience though. Let me tell you, when you get to the next level, and I can't wait till I'm in Minnesota on the right side of the river where I want to be. Not saying St.
There you
Paul's
go.
bad. It's St. Paul's amazing, but um, yeah, it's a really cool thing.
Yeah, no, 100%. And feel free to talk on yourself. That's why we have you on the podcast. But does it occur to you ever, you grew up in Wisconsin. Were you a big Brewers fan just from regionality, or did you have another fandom growing up?
So I usually get a lot of crap for this, but I was a Cubs fan growing up. My dad would watch them on WGN. Harry Carey, some of the best, and Sammy Sosa, some of those guys. Watching them. You know, I would get a lot of grief for being a Cubs fan, but I always would say, and people might not like this, but I would always root for the Brewers if they weren't playing the Cubs.
Yeah, I
So
mean, you would get a lot of crap for that. Either A, if you were playing for Milwaukee because they're in the same division, or if you were in the
exactly.
Milwaukee system because they're in the same division, or if the Cubs weren't one of America's two teams growing up because the Cubs and the Braves were on TV every day. So even current
Every
major
day.
leaguers are like, "Oh yeah, I grew up a Braves fan because they were on TV every day."
Yeah, I
So
feel
I
like
don't
that's
think
just
you'll get
how it
as much
rolls.
crap for that as but does it occur to you though that you're playing right now and you are it on the doorstep of a major league team that's not that far from where you grew up? Does that
And
ever
that
enter your mind?
it really does. And I've had the pleasure of playing with guys like Matt Wallner and Louis Varland who grew up in that Minneapolis area, and to see them be like the hometown kids and have success, like it's really cool. And I feel like I'm close to that. I also get a lot of grief for being a Badgers fan and playing in Gopher country. So we keep it light, we keep it fun, but it is
Yeah, I mean
cool.
just look at the reception that Adley Rutschman got at the home run derby for being an Oregon kid, but
Yep,
he was at T-Mobile Park for the home run derby and they loved him, you know.
exactly. And it's a cool thing. A lot of my family and friends get to come over and watch, being so close. And luckily my wife gets to travel full time with me, so
That's pretty
um, you
awesome.
know, sh- she gets to see family, we get to see family, they get to come to the field, and it feels good to be back in the Midwest. I'm sure um, there's some home field advantage there when it's cold early in the year. And it's
For
I'm
sure,
I'm
for
used to
sure.
those things, and the
There have
just the
been
people and everything. Yeah.
there have been many early season series that have gotten snowed out in Milwaukee and Chicago and those places. So,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely. It's not for the faint of heart up there when you go up there in April.
But you mentioned playing college ball at Milwaukee, Wisconsin. What is your favorite college memory of playing college baseball? Like, is there a story that sticks out in your mind of like, oh, this happened and it was nuts?
There's it's nothing too crazy. There's some things, like I think it's just like the day to day. We didn't really have like great facilities or anything, so um, luckily now they do. It's one of those things that they were working really hard to get while I was there, and the year after I left, they got them. But
Always happens that way. Always.
it does, yeah. I feel like I left it a better place, but no, I don't want to take any credit for any of that stuff. But um, nothing too crazy. I think the every year we had a golf outing, and being from Wisconsin, people really like to drink, and we had one. We had a teammate of mine. I'll leave his name out, but he wanted to try to drink a beer for every hole, and he succeeded,
Oof,
but
ooh.
barely. And
He
I think,
succeeded for a very short period of time.
yes, he I don't think he even realized he did succeed until maybe the next day or so. But he was
After the
okay
rest of
and
the team
everything.
told
But
him, I'm sure.
yeah, exactly. So nothing too crazy like that. Obviously, just like the fun camaraderie about. I think one year we weren't supposed to play intramural basketball, but we ended up playing, and kind of torched the competition. We had a guy named Elijah Goodman who was like the Wisconsin rebound leader of all time or something like that. And he put in some work down on the boards for us. But other than that, just normal college fun experiences.
Absolutely. So, you mentioned you're drafted out of a relatively small school. You were drafted in the 19th round, so you had to wait around a little bit. Can you describe your draft day experience, the day that you got the call?
A lot of nerves, a lot of maybe like insecurities about the whole process. I was, the first of my family and friends or anybody that I really had known other than like Dalton Varsho, who I played with. But he was much higher round, much bigger prospect and everything coming out of Wisconsin and Milwaukee than I was. So our process was obviously different, but it was a lot of nerves and a lot of waiting around, and just I felt like I was going to get taken. I had heard some things, but I'd heard I was going to get taken earlier, and this is a thing that a lot of guys will tell you is that they hear round 7 to 10, and then it doesn't happen, and then you're kind
Yeah,
of, oh, well, okay, is it going to happen? Did I get passed up? All those kind of things. And it's funny because the Twin Scout called me and said they were going to draft me, and then about 20 seconds later, the Rocky Scout was like, "Hey, we're going to take you," and I was very confused
Whoops.
because I was like, I thought I just got taken, and and it ended up being he didn't realize that they had just taken me off the board, but yeah, it happens fast. It's a call, and there you are.
No disrespect to the Rockies organization. I've been to Denver. It's amazing. But as a pitcher, I'm sure you're a little bit you're a little bit glad that you won't have to pitch regularly in the high altitude of Coors Field.
Yeah, that's a thing. People say that is true, and I've had the pleasure of pitching over in Arizona a few times in spring training. We had the cool experience in college of pitching against the Brewers in like an exhibition game and stuff. And I'll tell you, the ball does fly a lot further than you think. So, yeah,
You know,
I'll take less homers.
they always say that Colorado has to draft their pitchers because nobody wants to sign there in free agency. You know?
Yeah, luckily for me, I am a sinker baller, so I think I could find some success there
See,
if
that's what
that
Colorado
opportunity
needs to
knocks.
do. They need to like go draft sinker ballers or hire like Brandon Webb as their pitching coach, who had like the nastiest sinker of all time, and just teach all their pitchers to throw like 80-pound sinkers,
Just
and
a
then you're
sinker
fine.
factory over there. Yeah,
For
I
sure.
mean, yeah,
That is the answer. I don't know
I
if the
guess that's
Rockies are
the answer.
listening.
Maybe you should send them an email. Just say I
I
have the answer
should.
for you guys.
I would love it if they listen to this podcast. They probably don't. But if you're listening, Colorado, Sinker Ball Factory. Anyway,
Sinker ball factory.
uh, uh, so where were you when the call came in? Were you just sitting at home waiting and like clicking your fingers, or like some guys are on the golf course when they get the call, or
Yeah,
where were you?
it's uh as crazy as life is. I was just moving into the first apartment that we had in Jacksonville. We had played the conference tournament up in Ohio, and my wife Liz and my oldest golden retriever Charlie, they were driving down together, and I caught a flight the next day, and within 2 days I was getting the call to from the Twins to get drafted, and then I left I left them with a half empty apartment and was down in Fort Myers 4 days later. It was a wild experience, a lot like kind of like a whirlwind, like going back and thinking about it. It came and went so fast. I was here and there, got the call, and then was in Fort Myers, and then in East Tennessee, Elizabethton, Tennessee, 2 weeks later. So it's
You're
a
in you're
quick all
yeah,
over the place.
you go from moving boxes of towels and cutlery and plates, and you get the call like, hey, you're gonna play professional baseball.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Let me set this box down real quick.
Yeah, cool
Um,
first job, right? Like, right, like
no,
most
exactly,
people out of
exactly.
college are getting desk jobs or doing those things, and I was lucky enough to be able to get that call.
So one of my favorite um questions to ask athletes that come on this podcast is so you played college baseball and there's some traveling involved in that and all this sort of stuff. And then you go to the minor leagues where you travel to a lot of maybe smaller markets, maybe a little bit smaller cities. You go to a lot of different places. You can see some stuff. What's your best travel story from playing baseball?
There was one this year. We were in Louisville, which isn't like a small market. I wasn't feeling fantastic. There was kind of like a cold going around the team, and I had pitched the day before, so um, I think we had lost, so there was no like after game speech or anything. So I kind of showered and got dressed quick to get on the bus to go back to the hotel, and I heard some commotion going on. And this was this year. Um, I was the only guy on the bus, and a lady I think there was a festival down the road, so I think she was a bit inebriated, but
Oh,
she barely had any clothes on, and she decided she was going to run on the bus and like run up the aisle, down the aisle. The bus driver kicked her off, and
and
then
just you were there and you're like,
I was like, what is going on right now? And
exactly. No.
it gets a little wilder. She didn't like that one of the memorabilia like autograph guys outside was taking a video of her, and she decked him. Just
Oh man.
gave him the
Oh,
old haymaker, right in front of everybody, and then just kind of sprinted off. It was one of those moments where you're like, what did I just witness right there? What do we got
and
going
because
on?
you weren't feeling well and you probably had a little bit of a cold, you probably thought, did that actually happen? Or so, it was one
Yes,
of those things like, did
yes,
I just hallucinate? Kind of thing.
right.
But I always love asking that question because you never know what the person's going to say. I had a friend come on here that works in the Yankee scouting department now, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I was the travel secretary for this minor league team at the time, and we needed a deciding game at the end of the year because we were tied, and we had to." And he said, "So we had gotten this bus, and then there was like weather problems. So like me and the other travel secretary were like, we're playing for a pink slip. The winner gets on this bus and goes to the playoffs because the playoffs started the next day, and they were in Syracuse, and the playoffs were in like Illinois or something. And so it was like the winner gets this bus. And so they were playing for a pink slip. And then they get on the bus and like there's a storm. And so there's a tree in the road and they had to wait and they had to wait. So you never know what the story's
You
going to be. That's
never
why I always
know.
like to ask that question because it can literally be anything.
You would be surprised by how much like the travel stuff happens where like, you're this happened a few times, like for example this year in Rochester we had like a 3:30 a.m. bus, something like this, to go to the airport to fly out, and the bus didn't show up, so they sent us like a party bus that was like a 40-person occupancy. So we had like all of us trying to fit like our bags, and everybody was trying to get on at 3:30 in the morning. Yeah, it's crazy. You never know what's going to happen when you show up to some of these things. You're like, well, hopefully the bus is here. I don't know. I guess we'll
Yeah,
see. Find out.
I think that's what it was. They had to play the deciding game in Syracuse, and the playoffs started in Rochester the next day. And it was so they had to like get to yeah. So you just never know. And so
Never know.
minor league baseball especially, I think the environments are super unique. Like I
Hmm.
feel like minor league baseball, the environments are super unique to the market that they're sitting in. You get
Absolutely.
a real you get a real taste for the city or the town you're playing in when you're in the minor leagues and doing all that traveling and all this sort of stuff. And so what's the best minor league environment that you've played in?
I think honestly where I play in St. Paul is probably the best. I have a little hat on right here,
That's a good answer.
from
It's a good
from
answer.
a golf outing. But yeah, they pack out every night. The fans are into it. They you know, there's never really a dull moment. They do a lot of in-game stuff that's fun to watch for players too. Obviously, being a reliever in the bullpen, sometimes the games can drag on a little bit, but they do a lot of good stuff there. And like I said, the fans show out. They're always loud. It's always, it's not always like that when you go places. Especially when we play on like a Tuesday night or a Wednesday afternoon or something. Des Moines, Iowa is another cool place. When the fans come, it's really loud. It's a cool, obviously it's like the Iowa Cubs and
Oh, it's
all the,
Iowa. Like, is this heaven? No, it's Iowa. And
no,
one
it's
of the greatest
Iowa.
movies ever. Yeah, right.
Exactly. So there's a few good places for sure. But I think St. Paul's got the cake. I haven't been everywhere, but out of all the places I've been, like consistently, they show out all the time.
I had a buddy that played summer league college ball in Madison,
Okay,
and
I've
he
heard unbelievable things.
the Madison Mallards, and he was talking
Yep.
about how much he loved it there, and he brought me back a Mallard bobblehead, which I still have part of. It broke, so I still have the head. I don't know where the body is,
I feel
but
like they always break.
I still have the head. But he played there, and he was like, "Oh man, you wouldn't believe because
No, it's
and yeah, and you probably wouldn't because that UP area, like you said, playing high school college ball in Wisconsin, you don't know what the weather's going to do. It's not always the best scene. You know the
yep,
story of Brandon Nimmo playing in Montana and not being able to play high school baseball because they don't have it.
right.
So he had to
Exactly.
join American Legion. So you just
Yep.
never know, you know. And so you you mentioned that like being in the bullpen stuff can drag on and that kind of stuff and the popular point of discussion of the last couple of years. I know I have my opinions on it, but I had friend of the pod Donnie DeWeese on a few months ago, and he we were talking about some of the rules, and he had some things to say. So what are your thoughts on the current state of baseball and the rule changes that have taken effect over the last couple of years?
I
Whether it's
think
the pitch clock or the runner on second to start extra innings, that kind of thing. What are your thoughts?
I think it benefits everybody. I think obviously the goal is to have more action and a faster paced game, and I think the rules obviously did that. And um, you know, with guys starting on second base, we play 162 games, or in AAA we play like 140. Um, those 17, 18 inning games, like as fun as they probably are for fans, it's tough sometimes to, come back around and play the next day, or you fry
Yeah.
your bullpen trying to win a game and all of a sudden it's, now you lose a couple straight because of it. And um but that's neither here nor there. I really think the rule changes are great for baseball. I think maybe one thing I didn't enjoy so much was the in AAA we had the robo umpire for the first three games, and then the next three games was like the challenge system, which I liked much better. Where the umpire with the robo zone, like umpire just gets it and says strike or ball. With the challenge system, it was more you have the umpire and they could challenge a few times. I think you get three challenges. If you win it, you keep it. If you lose it, you lose it.
Right.
So, and that was more fun, I think, for players and fans, of like looking up at the scoreboard, seeing if it was a strike or a ball. And in that sense, I think the RoboZone kind of takes the, baseball out of
Human element.
baseball. Like, yeah, the human element of like, you watch Greg Maddux and those guys pitch, and sometimes they're getting a few inches off the corner, and that's what made him so good, was he would just abuse it. And you've probably seen a lot of guys do that over the course of the years of just being good pitchers, and does that maybe make the game more fun for guys who like pitching? Absolutely. But for people who like home runs and, action, not so much.
I think I used to have a much more firm stance on the idea of the robo umpire. Well, as I mentioned Donnie DeWeese a few minutes ago, he was actually in favor of it because he's gotten called out on strikes on his fair share of non-strikes. But
Exactly.
I think one of my favorite things about having an umpire is, and there's a lot to not like, but about having an umpire is that each strike zone is different, and for the most part, the umpires will stick to a strike zone that has the same dimensions. You just don't know if it's going to be a little down and a little left or a little up, and figuring that out with each umpire is very very interesting and unique to the game. But
Absolutely.
but at the same time, I I used to say robot umpires absolutely not. It takes the human element out of baseball. It takes the character out, that kind of thing. But over the last season or two, we've seen some really egregious missed calls,
Yeah.
and there's no accountability for the umpires and the people that, if they're like, oh, I missed it, oh well. Like,
Right. And I think there probably could be some more, that they could do about that. But I do think that sometimes maybe the strike zone on TV isn't fully accurate to like what you're seeing. So like they might have it up there. I think, and we talk about this all the time, or at least like we did with the Saints team this year. Like that's the worst thing they've ever done for baseball, is put the strike zone on the TV screen, because that's all people are watching. It's like, oh, was that a strike? Was that not a strike? Like if it clips the zone, or maybe it's like an inch or two outside, that's all people are complaining about. And
oh, for sure.
there's I think people realize the ones that are balls called strikes as opposed to strikes called balls. I think you think about those ones way more. Obviously I'm a pitcher, so I'm a little bit biased to those things, but
Right.
um I think the human element of that, like you said, most of the guys are pretty good, but there are some bad apples in there who are, maybe not, maybe shouldn't be back there all the time, and maybe they can have a system where they fix that. I'm not exactly sure how
Yeah,
all of that would work, but
I just don't love the idea of and this is true of all sports, I think, but baseball, it happens the most often. Is I often say that your job as an umpire in baseball or a ref is to be forgotten. And
Yes,
if your presence is made known, it's usually for a bad reason.
exactly.
And you're not allowed to argue balls and strikes anymore. And if you do, it's almost an automatic ejection. But like, what if the umpire just really missed, and like
Yeah,
the
what if he's
manager or
wrong,
the
you know?
player has a gripe, and the umpire can just be like, get out of my face, even if he was 1000% wrong. And
Right.
I don't like that at all. And I think
No,
there's something that can be done about that. But like
absolutely.
there,
We hear
yeah,
that stuff a lot too, where guys are, you know, say like guy gets called out on strikes and he's arguing with it, and the umpire's like, no, like go check, because obviously they have all the data. You can go see every pitch right away where it is. You can go into the video room and see like, you know, where the pitch was, where the zone had it, and all those things. And a lot of times they are wrong even after they say that, where they're like, no, I'm right, and blah blah this and that. Go check the zone, and they go check the zone, and sure enough, they're wrong. Yeah, obviously there are some cases where they are right, but most of the time the hitters and catchers have a really good understanding of like where the zone is too.
yeah. No, and I have to ask, this wasn't one of my, or I will say before I say this, is that I think the rule that I still have a problem with is I had a real problem with the pitch clock at first, and then like at spring training it was rough and that kind of stuff. But then I've you hard you you've hardly been able to notice it this year,
Mm-mm.
and it's been really really good. And I don't really notice like, oh, the game's over faster, because I just love to
No.
enjoy baseball as a fan. But as you mentioned, it can make a difference to a player in a different way. And so my whole thing is like, I don't love the idea in extra innings. And you as a pitcher can probably, you've probably faced the situation or know somebody that has, is that you can start extra innings, not give up a hit, and lose the game. Because
Yeah, that
you can give up a couple of sac flies, have two outs, and then there's a pass ball or a wild or something, and you didn't do anything wrong, and you still lost the game.
yeah, that and I think that's the tough part about it, is like obviously there's pros and cons to it. Excuse me, but um I mean, that is a tough way to lose a game, right? But the way that I think about it in baseball is that the good teams make it happen. Like the good teams hit with runners in scoring position. Like you see all the teams in the playoffs right now, like they're good at that. They understand getting a runner over. They understand doing their job and doing those things. So, to me, if you're a pitcher and you get out of that situation, like you did a heck of a job.
Yeah.
If you're the offense and you score, like you should score. There's a runner on second base with nobody out. Like, so it's kind of one of those back and forth things where like I think it makes it more interesting because every pitch matters then in extra innings. Like if you mess up, like okay, the pressure's on you now. You let the run score, or you see it a lot of times where guys score 2 or 3 runs and the game's over in extra innings because that momentum kind of breaks. We're like, oh, we let them score, and then the next guy scores, and then it's kind of over after that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's really good perspective. I think the way I see it is that it puts into effect. I mean, pitch clock is one thing, but the thing about that rule is that it puts into effect a situation where an outcome of a game can be outside the control of the players.
yeah, and
You
I
know,
think that's what
in a way.
I don't I from like talking to you and talking to fans and stuff, I think that's what they don't want to see is like, either the umpires or a rule change take away from the game itself, right? Like you want to see who's supposed to win is supposed to win, who's supposed to lose is supposed to
Uh,
lose. Like we're seeing a lot in football right now too, where like
right.
there's some bad penalties that have been costing college and pro teams games, and that nobody likes that. It's not
I'll
fun
say
for anybody
this.
to watch.
I usually try to stay unbiased on this podcast, but I'll tell you because you brought it up. I am a big Colts fan,
Okay.
and they lost this week to the Browns on back-to-back penalties, both of which were pretty bad calls. And it
Yeah.
basically handed the game to the Cleveland Browns.
And it's not fun to watch as a fan. And
No, it's not.
even even being like a if you were a Browns fan, it might not feel as good winning that way as opposed to being like, yeah, we fairly squarely won that game, as opposed to having the refs like take control of it.
as a Colts fan, it was a gut check. I mean, you have games that you kind of expect to lose because it's a rebuilding year, but I actually predicted the Colts to be a wild card team because they're better than people think.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
obviously Richardson getting hurt throws a wrench in that, but Minshew's been really, really good and he played really well on Sunday. There was no Deshaun Watson, there was no, all this sort of stuff. And that the defense could have played better, but those calls really kind of handed Cleveland the win.
Yep, and like bouncing off of that, watching the Twins games at home, and some of the calls, where we kind of have momentum, and then all of a sudden they get a pitch 2 or 3 inches out of the zone, that's called a strike for a strikeout, or
Yeah.
something like that that kills momentum. It's like you kind of take the bat out of someone's hand, or you take the game away from your defense or something. It's like back to that where the ref or umpire, like, I don't want to acknowledge, like, it's nice that you're there, you're doing a great job, but like you doing a great job makes you kind of
Yeah, your job is to
disappear
not
in
be
there.
noticed. Yeah.
Right.
That's
So
100% the case. It's interesting that you bring up, there are things that fans don't want to see with the rule changes and not just baseball, but in football and in basketball and all sports. There are a lot of rule changes recently that are geared towards bringing in new fans,
right.
but some of the rule changes are controversial. And the way I look at that is if you change rules in an effort to bring in new fans, the fans you're going to bring in aren't going to be anything more than the casual fan. And if you go too
Right.
far with those rule changes to bring in the casual fan, you're going to lose the diehards that you always had.
Yeah,
So
I
I feel
kind
like
of
I feel like the risk is a lot higher than the reward with this. We got to bring in new fans, kind of thing.
absolutely, and I kind of always relate that saying to Happy Gilmore. When he's on the tour in that movie where he gets there, and Shooter McGavin and all these guys hate that his wild fans are there, and it's different than what golf usually is. And I think it's funny to relate that to that, because I think it's like that, where you try to bring in new fans with whatever it is, and sometimes you maybe neglect the people who have been very loyal through that process. And
Because the truth
it's
is, the casual fan isn't. I mean, I don't want to say isn't really a fan. A fan is a fan, but a
right.
casual fan is much more likely to get bored just
Right.
with it in general because, all right, I watched it, I'm done. So I feel like the risk is much higher than the reward of we want to try this to bring in new fans. But anyway, I got a couple more questions for you, and I'll let you get out of here. Um, what was it like pitching in big league camp this year?
It was an
Training camp.
amazing experience. Being able to, obviously we were a playoff team, and a lot of veterans, like Pablo and Sonny, and all those guys, even Brock Stewart, and even Correa. I got throwing against Correa, and all the guys that were there, that have been there, done that, understand it. I learned, maybe not right away, but I had a journal this year where I wrote down a lot of stuff, and I kind of hit a snag this year in the middle of the year where I struggled, and I got to look back at those things, and get back to being very simple with it. And Correa was telling me stuff about my delivery that made me better, and once I went back to those kind of things, I was better. And it's cool to be around people who, obviously it was my first big league camp. I haven't been to the big leagues, but treated me like I mattered. I was important. And if I could contribute, then obviously they wanted me there. And, hopefully, I'm expecting to get that opportunity again this year to do that, and, go to the big leagues, and help the team out. And it was a really cool experience to be able to ask those guys questions and be like, "Hey, Sonny, like, what do you do with your cutter? Like, where do you try to throw? What are you thinking about?" And them sit down, and Sonny talked to me for about 30 minutes one day about throwing cutters and setting hitters up and doing those kind of things. And it's really cool for a guy who he doesn't have to
Awesome.
do that. He doesn't have to do that. He doesn't have to sit there and explain it to me,
Yeah.
but he took the time out of his day to do that, and make me a better player. And that's really, really cool.
That's so cool. I'm not even a player. I consider myself more than a fan. Like I've always been a student of the game, so I can nerd out about like if anyone sat not even a major league stud like Sonny Gray, but if anyone sat down with me and talked cutters, for 30 minutes, I would be in heaven. Like that.
Yeah, it's
I'm such a nerd about that stuff. That's awesome. I'm a big fan of Pablo. I've always been a huge fan of Sonny. It was so great to see him flourish this year in Minnesota after, he was this great pitcher in Oakland, and then he went to New York, and as often happens when you go to the Yankees, no disrespect to the organization, but because of their strict rules about uniform and how you're supposed to look and how you're supposed to do, like players can lose their identities there for a while. So it was really really great to see him kind of have some success in Cincinnati and then come to Minnesota and find his way there. That is super awesome. But on that note, obviously the Twins had a great year. It didn't end the way I'm sure many in the organization wanted, as they wanted to keep playing and be there right now. But what are your expectations for both the team and for the organization, the major league team and the organization in 24 that
I
hopefully you'll get
think
to be a part of?
no doubt I believe, that I have a lot of love for the Twins. Obviously been with the organization for my entire career. And the people that are in the organization, not only the players, but like the front office and the staff, I have no doubt that with the core group that they have up there and the guys that are in AAA, and I'm sure, they'll go and sign some guys as well. But, um, that when they struggled a little bit in the middle of the year, people were kind of, maybe we should go get people, maybe we shouldn't. And I thought it was so cool that the front office was like, no, like these are our guys. Like I trust that we brought in the right people, like we've drafted the right people, like we have all the right people. And sure enough, look at, 2 months later, they're one of the hottest and best teams in baseball. They're going to
Well,
the playoffs and they make a statement.
100%. 100%.
So I truly think there's going to be a lot of buzz. There's going to be a lot of energy. There's a lot of fun guys. Like I said, the core group of like veterans and stuff that are there. Um, they want to win, and I think that's a big deal to have guys in the clubhouse who want to win at all costs and will take the young guys under their wing and do that. And I think the young guys will only get better. And I'm hoping to be up there and have an impact and do those kind of things like I believe I can and like I have in the lower levels and upper levels of the minor leagues. And I got a big smile on my face. I'm excited for next year. I've been grinding already at home and crushing it in the gym and doing all the things that I need and know I want to do. So
Like you said, there was a period in the middle of the year where the Central was literally anybody's game.
yep.
You had Cleveland there for a while. You guys, Detroit was making some noise. I've kind of had my eye on them for the last 3, 4 years that like something's brewing down there. Like there's something really cool happening there. And then Minnesota was able to turn it on at the end and they finally found their offense because for much of the year it was like dominant pitching and kind of some so-so offense. So they finally found kind of their groove and they took control and they made it to playoffs. And hopefully, here in the next couple of years with you on that roster, bolstering that bullpen or whatever the case may be, y'all can make it to the Fall Classic. But speaking of the Fall Classic, before I let you get out of here, as we're recording this, the Rangers have already punched their ticket, and we have Game 7 between the Phillies and the Diamondbacks tonight. First of all, who do you have tonight in Game 7?
I've always been a fan of the underdog. I don't think people really expected Arizona to be as good as they are, but as like a player and as a baseball fan, baseball is not one on paper. It's not, football. If it's Alabama against, Chattanooga State or something like that, like, Alabama's going to win that game. It's not always cut and dry. So
Most of the
I
time.
like,
I think the 2007 Michigan team would have some words about that.
yeah,
But
I agree. But I have Arizona tonight. And I think that would be a really fun. You want to talk about bringing some energy and stuff to baseball. I think you have two teams that haven't been there in a while that are playing really, really well, and they have some, some studs that maybe weren't as well known at the beginning of the year, some prospects coming up, and maybe start some of those legacies and start some of those dynasties this year with winning maybe when you're not supposed to or when you're young or whatever it may be. I think that would be a really fun World Series. Would be Rangers, against Arizona. But even if the Phillies win, I think the Phillies are fun to watch too.
And and let's say you're right. Let's say Arizona gets it done. Who do you have winning it all? If it's Arizona, Texas, who do you got?
I think Texas just because I think that they've been playing really hot, and I think that like I think if you have a guy like Scherzer and like obviously if they had DeGrom, it'd be way
Montgomery,
different.
who I've
Yeah,
always been
but
really high on. Like
right, you you
through all his stops, he's been so good.
you have some of those guys that can go take over a game. Not saying that Arizona doesn't have those guys, but like you get Scherzer game one and he goes 6 or 7 scoreless. It's that game one is really important. Not saying if you lose game one, you're gonna lose, but if you win game one, like you're feeling good about yourself. And I think the Rangers pull it out, but I think it'll be a series. I think it's gonna be like
I
four
think
two.
I think it's just one of those things that like you talk about how hot they are, and just in the last 3 years, we've seen how important getting hot is. In
Yep.
2021, the 88 win Braves won the title. And in the next year, the 87 win Phillies get to the World Series. And now you have the Rangers who had a lot more than 87 wins, but they didn't always play their best during the season, so they got hot when it mattered. And you have Adolis Garcia hitting 5 home runs in 4 games, and you have,
Right.
they're undefeated in the playoffs on the road, which is an absurd stat. You
Stupid
know,
stat. Yeah.
that the last series against the Astros was just the second time in MLB history that the road team won every game.
I mean, that's if you're making history along the way, like especially in that way, winning on the road, which is hard to do even in the regular season. If you're doing that in the playoffs, like you're making a statement doing that. And that's why I think they're gonna win. But baseball is baseball. One ball could hit a pebble and it bounces one way, and you lose the game, or it's it's never cut and dry. It's never easy.
No, for sure, and that's why you play the game. You
That's why
see
you
what
play it.
that's why you play so many games in baseball is because it's not like you said in football. The team that's supposed to win is probably gonna win. In
Right.
basketball, probably the same thing. But in baseball, that's why you play series. That's why you play so many games. And a lot of non-baseball fans don't get that.
Right.
Like,
It's
a bad team could play a good team, and then I think there was a stretch where who was it? I think it was like maybe it was Houston or somebody or one of the best teams in the regular season at one point lost like 5 out of 6 against the Royals and the A's consecutively, the two worst teams in baseball, and they lost five of
right.
those 6 games, and they were a good team. So
Right.
you don't know, and that's why you play so many games. But those are all the questions I have for you. Thanks so much again to Austin Schulfer for joining us on Empire Sports Talk. We really appreciate that, and when you finally get that call up in Minnesota, we're gonna get that jersey and put it up here in the podcast room for you.
I can't wait. You can I'll put one of those on my tab and get one sent over to you.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, and we really appreciate all the insight that you've brought to being a player, and because I sit up here and I talk about sports from a fan perspective, but it's really nice to get somebody that's on the ground, making the pitches, playing the games, doing the stuff. So thanks for joining us, Austin.
Appreciate your having me.
And for those that enjoy the podcast, give a like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and go follow our YouTube channel for more great interviews like this one. I'm Roman Gennaro for Empire Sports Talk. I'll see you next time. So there you have it. That was a great interview with Austin Schulfer. I want to thank him again for joining us on the podcast. And keep an eye out for the fact that the NBA has started. The highly anticipated debut of Victor Wembanyama came and went, and he finished with 15 points. Not the flashiest debut, but gave us signs of what's to come. And I think the more games he gets under his belt, the better he's going to be. It's good to see Zion Williamson healthy, and I'm excited to see what happens this NBA season. As we are recording this, the World Series between the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Texas Rangers kicked off Friday night, and it is officially Fall Classic time, and I couldn't be more excited. Let us know in the comments of wherever you're watching this or listening who you think's going to win the series. That's all I have for you. This is Roman Gennaro of Empire Sports Talk. I want to thank Austin Schulfer, the St. Paul Saints, and the Minnesota Twins once again, and I'll see you next time.